Welcome to Assembly Calendar. I'm Mike Friesen. With us for our program today, Assemblyman Mark Johns. Mark Johns represents the 135th Assembly District. That includes Monroe County. We thank you folks all throughout the greater Rochester area for joining us for our program today. And Mark Johns, nice to see you.
Good to be back.
We got a lot to talk about. I mean, because we're closing down the 2017 legislative session. So in the next few remaining days, a good chunk of work gets done. We probably see more bills come through the hopper in the next few days than we've seen so far this legislative session since the first of the year.
Oh yeah, the majority of the bills are done in June. Now we're here for 6 months, and over 50% of the bills are done in June. Figure that out.
Yeah, it's I think it's a procrastination kind of game that people. You got to have a deadline. You got to have a deadline, and that's how you get things done. A lot of people live by that, and I think the legislature is an example of that. We're going to be talking about that and what might be happening in these remaining few days. But I want to talk to you a little bit about the people along the shores of Lake Ontario, some of whom you represent.
Oh yeah.
They've been having a tough go of it this spring. It's well documented in your area that some parts of New York State are underwater that usually aren't underwater right now.
Right, and to be honest with you, the IJC, the International Joint Commission, which is a commission comprised of American and Canadian membership, thought it was a good idea to raise the lake level. It's almost up at 249 feet above sea level. Now the problem is, traditionally they've always lowered the lake. They do it through the locks and dams up the St. Lawrence River. And they try and have the lake be at its lowest level, usually January, February, maybe March, because you're going to get a lot of rain events and snow runoff in March and April, and that jacks the water level up. Well, with this new 2014 plan, they're allowing it to be up to 2 feet higher. Now, if you're 243 in January and you gain 4 feet, it's 247. That's high average, but it's manageable. When you're 245 in January and you go up 4 feet, you're 249, and we see what's happening back home. The town of Webster that I live in, Arundequoit, the town of Greece is getting hit hard, Hilton, the whole shore, Wayne County, from Niagara County all the way through to the Thousand Islands are really suffering big time, probably $100 million worth of damage.
So does the state look to that international commission that made that change, the 2014 plan, and say maybe you better rethink this?
Oh yeah, the governor has said that it was a big mistake of the IJC to do this. Myself and some other assembly people wrote a letter 5 years ago telling the IJC not to go ahead with these plans that would raise the water level too high. There's unbelievable damage, erosion. You see all kinds of dirt and silt out there in the water. The embankments are falling into Lake Ontario. It's not a good idea. And to be honest with you, people say, well, you know what, I don't live on the lake, I'm not worried about it. There's two things you should be worried about. If you live in a town that's on the lake shore, it's costing those towns a lot of money. You're going to get higher taxes throughout the town. And for the people that live on lakefront property or bayfront property, they're going to get their assessment reduced. Their houses are not worth what they used to be worth. Yeah. So when their assessment is reduced, they're going to pay less taxes. Everybody else is going to pay more to make up the difference.
Right.
So it's a real problem. If you live in a county or a town that borders the lake shore or one of the bays, it's going to cost you money. And the governor and the state legislature are trying to come up with reparations to kind of help that along a little bit.
Well, that's just it. I know your office is doing all it can to help the people that you represent. And what can the state legislature do? You certainly can't go up against Mother Nature. You can't do that, but you can help out the people as best you can, I guess, who are going through some of these issues right now.
Right. Well, we're trying to cobble a bill together with the governor and with both houses of the legislature to come up with what I hope is tens of millions of dollars for reparations for people that are really suffering. And some people have lost their life savings with houses that have fallen into the lake or the bay.
Yeah, this is to free up some monies that were budgeted that normally, it frees them up early, right?
Yes, it does. And hopefully that'll pass before the end of session next week.
All right, well, the bill came up in the Assembly. Let's take a look at what some remarks you made on the floor when that bill came up for discussion, and then we'll be back with more of today's Assembly calendar.
I just wanted to stand up and rise. I'll be voting in the affirmative. I want to thank the Majority Leader, Mr. Morelli, for not only sponsoring this bill, getting us all on as co-sponsors. For those that don't realize, Lake Ontario is at an all-time high right now, about 249 feet above sea level. It's the highest it's been in recorded history. So I want to thank the Majority Leader. I want to thank him as well for having the press conference that we did in my hometown of Webster. So that was very nice as well, very magnanimous of Mr. Morelli. So thank you all for voting yes, affirmative in this particular bill. Thank you.
I got the sense there was some kumbaya being sung. That's good, though. It's nice to see the legislature, Democrats and Republicans coming together when it's important, right?
Oh, yeah. Yeah, as I say, the Lakeshore community is represented by a number of people, including senators as well. And everybody's in the same boat. And as I mentioned earlier, it doesn't just affect you if you're on the waterfront. It affects all the towns, cities, and counties that border the lakefront or the waterfront, because there is damage. And that damage, in terms of costs, is going to be spread throughout the government.
You know, and that could translate, too, to the rest of the state of New York. I mean, because you got to help out those folks along the lake, and there's going to be resources coming from the state that are going to be directed towards that as is appropriate. It's
an unfortunate thing that the IJC thought that this was a good idea, but these are the unintended consequences of people thinking that they're smarter than nature, or we're gonna do something that's going to be better for the environment. And look at the environmental damage that this has caused.
And Mother Nature will give you a good kick every once in a while to let you know that she's still boss, right?
Yeah, you're right about that.
All right, so at the end of the 2017 legislative session, what would Mark Johns like to see happen in these remaining few days here in Albany?
Well, we talk a lot about reform. Certainly, I talk about reform more than anybody else, but what we're looking at in this November 7th election is on the back of the ballot, there is a question. So do you want a constitutional convention, yes or no? And a lot of people are concerned about it. A lot of unions, a lot of government unions, conservative groups. But my solution is that we can pass just two bills that I've authored, been around for a few years, the SOUL Act and the FDR bill. Now, keep in mind that 90% of the legislation that we author in the New York State Assembly never comes up for a vote. And we author more legislation than the U.S. House of Representatives. So we got plenty of bills. Some of them, I think, have some merit, but they never come up for a vote. Or they come up in one house and not the other house.
So tell us what the SOUL Act and the FDR bill is?
Yeah, well, the SOUL Act has been around a while, since the beginning, since I got here. It just stands for Single Opportunity to Legislate Equally. It will allow every member, majority, minority, either house, to bring one bill up every 2 years. So one bill every term to come up to the floor, not to be blocked in committee or blocked by party leadership. Let's bring the bill of your choice, if you want to the floor. Let's have a debate, a discussion, and an up or down vote. And probably some of the popular ideas are 2-year budget cycles, unicameral legislature, and the most popular one, term limits. Now, why would something so popular never come up for a vote? Well, the fact is that sometimes the party bosses and the leadership block these votes. But what I'm saying is, if in the first 6 months of the year, while we're here in session, we don't bring these up, the SOUL Act would allow these bills to come up. Then, after session is over, if one of these bills doesn't come up, or let's say it passes just one house and not the other, that's where the FDR bill kicks in. And
what's FDR stand for?
It stands for Fairness and Democratic Reform Act.
All right.
So,
and what would that do?
Well, what that does is it's a referendum bill. It's a permissive referendum. It gives permission to the voters to go out there, take any of our bills, get at least 50,000 signatures statewide, at least 25,000 outside of the New York City area, put our bill on the next coming general election ballot. So if we didn't pass term limits, say this year, or we don't pass it next year, fine. Get the signatures statewide and put it on the next November election ballot. And then people will come out. So they're corollary bills. I mean, if we won't do our job down here, or one house does and not the other, or it doesn't come up in most houses, which is kind of standard, then let's allow the public, because we say we represent the people, let's allow the public to take any of our bills. They've gone through bill drafting, and these are legitimate bills that have been scored and written up by lawyers and constitutional scholars here, so we know they're good bills. But if they don't come up for a vote in the Senate or the Assembly, let's have the public get signatures and put it on the ballot.
That sounds like basic initiative and referendum.
It is.
You hear California a lot of times has ballot question number such and such.
Right.
I think they do it a lot out there.
They do.
And it takes up some of those very particular issues that people petition. And all of a sudden, they've got a number of these types of issues on their ballots that people. So you think that would get some of these issues front and center here at in Albany, huh?
It would, and this is referendum, but it isn't initiative and referendum. The initiative would be the public goes out and writes up their own bills, and then sometimes they're not constitutionally viable. So this takes that whole are they constitutionally viable? We don't have to worry about it because they've already gone through bill drafting. These are our bills. So we're all proud of our legislation, right?
Right.
And we're all proud of our bills, and they've gone through bill drafters with smart lawyers and attorneys writing up these bills. So let's allow the public to take any of these bills and put them on the ballot.
As you noted, in your setup to these bills, your discussion about the SOLE Act and the FDR bill, there is going to be a constitutional convention question on the ballots this November. Why not just take up, say that let's have a constitutional convention, hope the people go for it, and who knows, maybe they're going to anyway if they're dissatisfied enough with what they're seeing coming out of Albany.
Right.
And then say, maybe we could take up some of these important issues like term limits at a constitutional convention. Why not just do it that way then?
Well, there's a lot of other things that could come up in a constitutional convention that might not be as, amenable to what people want. And what I'm suggesting is we have changed the Constitution in New York. Even in the years that I've been here, we've voted on gambling casinos, and then we let the public vote on it. Because to change any amendment to the Constitution to allow casinos, which I wasn't a fan of, but we allowed the public to vote on it. And it passed barely. But it did pass, and now we've seen new casinos popping up in New York. We voted on an amendment for a constitutional amendment for a paperless legislature. We used to have big stacks of paper. Everything had to be printed out. Now we do it online, and all the bills are done, and we read them on a computer screen. So we saved a lot of money there, but that was a constitutional amendment, and we let the voters vote on it. So term limits, other things, let's let them vote on that too.
I got less than a minute here, but I suppose one of the other concerns you might have with the Constitutional Convention is the powers that be, those political brokers, I think that you referenced earlier on, they get involved, and all of a sudden the will of the people doesn't really happen. It tends to get, the issues tend to get molded more by the people that are already in charge of things.
Right. Well, that's why I say we should do our job. And if we do our job, you wouldn't necessarily have to have a con. But if we're not going to do our job, people may go out there and say, hey, you know what, we'll take a chance in doing it for you.
All right. Well, that's going to be an interesting thing to watch. We've got just a few days to go here at the state capitol. And maybe we hope we'll catch up with you and run down exactly how this thing all plays out. Mark Johns, thanks for joining us today.
Thanks for having me. Appreciate
Mark
it.
Johns, thank him. I thank you folks, too, for spending your time with us. We'll hope to see you soon for our next edition of Assembly Calendar.